Well, welcome back to going through John's Gospel, a few chapters at a time, looking at key sections. We started with John chapter 1 to 3, looking at Jesus as the Son of God. Then we moved into 4 to 5, looking at Jesus as the Messiah, or the Christ. Today we're looking at John chapter 6 to 7, which is about Jesus as the bread of life. Let's start with the story at the beginning. In chapter 6, about the feeding of the 5,000. Now, there's a whole crowd which is following Jesus, and they're pursuing him because of the miracles. Big question, why do I follow Jesus? They're all sat down, Jesus is concerned for them, and he asks the disciples an impossible question. He asks them about feeding all these people. That's impossible, it's ridiculous. It's phenomenally expensive. And then just go to that boy that the disciples find. He's been prepared enough to bring his packed lunch with him. And the disciples ask him for it and he hands it over. A simple offering out of faith. I wonder what went through his mind. And yet as he offers that simple lunch which he carefully prepared for himself earlier in the day, Jesus turns it into a phenomenal provision for thousands of people, which humankind ever after we're going to hear about. Jesus provides more than enough. And the crowds declare him to be a prophet and they want to make him a king, but Jesus quietly slips away, not wanting to be made king at this time. He sends the disciples out across the lake, and in the middle of the night he approaches them on the water, just when they least expect it. I wonder how you feel about Jesus' presence with you now. When do you expect him to come close to you and draw near to you? Right in your hour of need, he comes. And as he comes, he says to the disciples, because they're not sure that it's really him, I am, are the words. Often translated it is I, but it's exactly the same as elsewhere translated I am. Very significant statement in John. Jesus says it many times. I am. Do not be afraid. So here we've had two further signs about who Jesus is. The feeding of the 5,000 and the walking on water. We find afterwards the crowds are a bit perplexed as to where Jesus is. They're trying to find him. And eventually they find him across the other side of the lake. And Jesus expresses concern because they're following him for the food. That's what they're wanting, physical food. Again, the question is why? Why are we following Jesus? What are we seeking from him? And Jesus says, look, don't seek physical food, seek rather food for eternity. And he goes on to say, I am the bread of life. I am the bread from heaven. I am bread from the Father. I've come from the Father. And the crowds in their minds, they're thinking about the bread from heaven as the manna of many years ago when Moses came out of Egypt and led the people in the desert, and God provided for them in a miraculous way. But Jesus is pointing to something that's new. It's so easy for us to look back to the past and seek for the same to happen again. But actually Jesus is doing a new thing in the Gospels. And Jesus is wanting to do a new thing in our lives too. It's often surprising what he does. But for each of us, he's wanting to bring that food for eternity. And the people are confused about this. How on earth can we eat Jesus? As a type of thing that's going on in their minds. But Jesus says, my words are spiritual words. I'm talking spiritual things. And Peter responds with that marvellous confession, you have the words of eternal life. That's who Jesus is. That's what he brings as the bread of life. And Jesus in this passage too, he highlights that he will feed all who his Father sends to him. He's not going to turn any away. So Jesus, the bread of life, contrasting nicely with the provision of bread to the 5,000. But then it continues in chapter 7 with Jesus and streams of living water. He starts by saying that his teaching is from God. And we're familiar with the theme of water because we've seen it in changing the water into wine. When Jesus was at the well, he said, I have living water to give you. Then Jesus walked on the water. Now he's saying, actually, living water will come up from within you as the Spirit comes on you. John explains that as being the Spirit. And so he talks about us being thirsty from within. Come, if you are thirsty, and I will give you living water. And there's this whole sense of mystery in it all, because it's from within. And there's this whole sense of mystery surrounding Jesus, because people are perplexed as to where he's come from, where he's going. He talks about coming from heaven. He's going to go to heaven. You can't follow where he is going, and so on and so forth. So there's this whole mystery, which is very hard to explain, about the Holy Spirit coming and being living water within an individual. But hard to explain, doesn't stop it being true. There's then a debate in the crowds as to who Jesus is again, as to whether he's just a prophet or whether he's the prophet, the Christ. And the temple guards come to arrest him, and yet they are taken in, maybe is the right word, they're certainly amazed by his teaching, and so they don't actually arrest him and return to the temple empty-handed. All this comes to the key question for us. What am I eating and drinking today? Am I eating the words of Christ? Am I drinking the spiritual water of life? The Lord bless you.